So, Nixon started the war on drugs in 1971, with Reagan enforcing it even more in the 1980s. The whole purpose of this so-called war on drugs was so that they could legally attack their political enemies. Former Nixon aide John E., well, I'm going to call him John E. because I don't know how to pronounce his weird-ass last name, stated in an interview, the Nixon campaign and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or being black, but by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We can arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. So Nixon declared a war on drugs before it even became a problem. Over a span of 40 years, the war on drugs has led to a 500% increase in incarceration that hits the poor and minority communities the hardest. In under 30 years, the United States prison population went from 300,000 to more than 2 million, with drug convictions being the reason for the huge increase. The United States imprisons more people than any other country, with the US having around 2.3 million people behind bars. Under Richard Nixon, 2/3 of the drug war budget actually went to treatment as opposed to law enforcement. And that got better results. But as the election came close, he would start back with his war on drugs rhetoric because it got him the votes. In 1982, Ronald Reagan enforced the war on drugs even further by pushing through harsh laws like the mandatory minimum. That makes it the law to give out a set amount of time for a particular crime regardless of the details or circumstances involving that crime. It also took away the power from judges to sentence individual cases as they see fit. The most harsh punishments that came from these laws being implemented was for drug offenses. The punishment for crack was 100 times more severe than that of powder cocaine. 55 grams of crack could cause you to get a mandatory minimum of 5 years, and it would take 500 grams of powder cocaine to receive the same sentence. Even though the only difference between the two is water, baking soda, and fire from a damn stove. Being that crack was cheaper than powder cocaine, this affected poor black communities the most. When the war on drugs hit full throttle in the 1980s, the imprisonment of blacks quadrupled, and weed arrests accounted for 80% of the growth in drug arrests in the 1990s. Blacks get jailed disproportionately from whites for marijuana, even though both use it at the same rates. Research states that when whites and blacks engage in the same type of illegal crime, blacks are more likely to be arrested, faced with tougher charges, and are likely to serve harsher sentences than whites. The state and federal prison population grew from 218,000 in 1974 to 1,509,000 in 2014. We lock up 700 people per 100,000, while Sweden locks up 53 people per 100,000. In 2016, 58% of inmates were black or Hispanic, but they only made up 30% of our population. Research suggests that whites are more likely to sell drugs and just as likely to use them, but blacks are 4 times more likely to be arrested for it. Another reason for the increase in incarceration in the United States is private prisons. Private prisons make donations to politicians, and in turn, they pass strict drug laws that imprison a mass amount of people for minor drug offenses. And private prisons make huge profits from every jailhouse bed they fill. The United States makes up only 5% of the world's population, yet they hold 25% of the world's prisoners. These private prisons make huge profits. To save money, states pay these private prisons to take in their inmates using tax money. These prisons make money by taking in inmates as cheap as possible. 65% of private prison contracts require an occupancy guarantee. That means states must have a certain amount of prisoners, typically between 80% and 90% of occupancy, or pay companies for empty beds. They make profits by providing low quality health care, paying guards less, and serving cheap, low nutritious food. This causes the prisons to be unsafe with a higher rate of inmate attacks and unsanitary conditions. Think Progress states 16% of federal prisoners are housed in private prisons. The two largest prison corporations are GEO Group and CoreCivic. Together they take in $3.3 billion in annual revenue, and the industry doubled in size between 2000 and 2010. The National Institute of Money and Politics found that GEO Group contributed $6,051,178 to the Republican, Democratic, and third-party candidates over the past 13 years. GEO and CoreCivic together have spent nearly $25 million on lobbying efforts since 1989. In 2010, Obama passed the Fair Sentencing Act. This reduced harsh punishments for using crack as opposed to using powder cocaine, even though they are byproducts of the same drug. Now, Trump appointed Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, and he is no stranger to controversy. In 1989, Ronald Reagan nominated Sessions to be a judge for the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Alabama. Senators voted against confirming Sessions 10-8. A few people who work with Sessions said he made some racist comments. He said to one black person, "Watch what you say to white folks," calling him a boy. Another colleague stated Sessions said, "I thought the KKK was cool until I found out they smoked pot." He also tried to prosecute 3 black civil rights activists, one of which was an advisor for Martin Luther King. They were being accused of tampering with voter ballots. The other activists claimed they were helping voters who were poor, uneducated, and in some cases illiterate. They were acquitted of all charges.
In 1984, Evelyn's husband Albert and fellow Civil League member began a new absentee ballot campaign that led straight to the confrontation of her lifetime. The confrontation that brought her face to face with Jeff Sessions, Alabama's U.S. Senator, who in 1984 was the U.S. Attorney for Southern Alabama, and the man who tried to put Evelyn, her husband, and Spencer Hogue in prison for decades. They were called the Marion Three.
We were just trying to help people. We have been helping people for over, I don't know how many years.
Jeff Sessions did not see it that way. Sessions brought a vote fraud conspiracy case to a federal grand jury and indicted the Marion Three. The defense attorney fact sheet said race was a factor. Our contention that this is a one-sided investigation designed to intimidate black voters. Civil rights leaders from across the country rallied behind the Marion Three. To them, it was a clear case of a U.S. attorney trying to prevent blacks in Alabama from gaining power. National figures came to the defense. Witnesses for the prosecution began changing their story. It took the jury just a few hours to return its verdict. The headline the next day would say it all. The Marion Three acquitted on all charges.
Now Sessions is on a quest to reboot this racist war on drugs once again by rolling back the Fair Sentencing Act put in by the Obama administration. He wants to go back to mandatory minimums, giving people with possession of drugs ridiculous amount of prison time for non-violent crimes, which of course disproportionately has devastating effects on poor, black, and brown communities. The only way we can stop this madness is if all of us stand up and stop ignoring these immoral tactics these politicians use to lock brown, black, and poor communities up for profit. Profit for private prisons and the politicians who benefit from their campaign donations. These strict drug laws are ripping families apart. Being able to legally discriminate against minorities when or if they get out of prison by being stamped with the felony charge and not being able to find a job. Getting thrown back into poor communities with no opportunity, just drugs, gangs, and violence to look forward to. It's a cycle that they want us to be in. This is Marlon, and you have watched LaceYoSelfPolitics. Like, subscribe, and I would greatly appreciate it.
That's a vibe. She wanna vibe. That's a vibe. It's a vibe, yeah, yeah. Late night. Oh, it's a vibe.